What's up, Branches team leaders? Hey, thanks for checking out this video. One of the big focuses we have going right now is leadership development. What we recognize is that as we grow as leaders, it will enable our teams to grow as well. And so in an effort to try and help all of us grow as leaders, we want to do more contact, more communication, more pouring into you as a team leader at Branches. We recognize that all of us have calendars, and most of them are full. And we also recognize that it'd be amazing if we could do an all-hands meeting and do this stuff live and in person every single month, but we just can't make that happen. And so what we're trying to do is a different delivery method of content. So here we are doing a video, sending it out via email, and our hope is that you can view this content at your convenience whenever there's a space in your schedule and on your calendar. You can view this, still interact, still learn, still grow. And so again, before we continue, I just want to reiterate, we love you guys. We're grateful for all the work that you do and all the time and all the energy and all the effort that you pour into Branches, and we want to pour back into you. So this is the first of hopefully many opportunities and pieces of content for us to grow together as leaders. And today I just want to take a moment to focus on something that I think is really, necessary for us to succeed at building a church that we can bring our friends to. And it has to do with the assumptions that we make and the assumptions that we base our decisions off of. Now, that may be confusing at first for you. What do you mean assumptions that we base it? What assumptions are we making? Let me give you some examples of what an assumption is. The assumption I'm talking about in the context of this conversation is a fact that we base decisions off of, or even just a belief about how people that go to our church, kind of their behavior. We believe that people want or desire things. We make an assumption about what people want, need, or desire, and we make decisions accordingly. So some of those assumptions that we already are making right now, here's a simple one. We assume that people go to church on Sunday morning. Therefore, we've decided to have a service or services on Sunday mornings. So that's an assumption and a decision made off of that assumption. Another assumption that we've made is that families, when they show up to a Sunday morning service, they expect, need, or desire age-appropriate environments for their kids that are separate from them so that the adults can drop their kids off, that they can drop their kids off somewhere safe, and their kids can maybe learn something, but they can be disengaged from their kids and be able to engage with some content for them. So therefore, we have a kids department that teaches, that allows parents to drop them off for the full length of the service. So there's some examples of some assumptions and some decisions made and based off of those assumptions. Now, I want to focus on really our vision statement. We're building a church we can bring our friends to, right? So if we're actually trying to do that, and we're actually trying to walk that out, there's some assumptions that we must make, and there's some decisions based on those assumptions that we must make. We've already kind of defined what that looks like for the vision statement. We've already defined that we're building a church, and the church is you and I, right? The church is people. We've also defined that our friends, we're building a church we can bring our friends to. We've defined our friends as people who are far from God. That may mean they've never been close to God. That may mean at one point in life they were close to God, but they've wandered away. They're not engaged in faith. They're not engaged in prayer or in church anymore. And so our friends are people who are far from God. Our friends may be people who are brand new to faith, to Scripture, to Jesus, to church, and they have no understanding or very little understanding of Scripture or faith or Jesus. We've also defined our friends as people who may be fearful of walking into the church in general. They may be fearful of reading Scripture. They may be fearful or confused about certain things about God and about church and about faith. And so we've defined who the church is. We've defined who our friends are. And now the next step, the next necessary step, is to make an assumption about some things. And the assumption that I want us to focus on is that if we are building a church that we can bring our friends to, then we should assume that our friends are showing up. We should assume that people at Branches are inviting their friends to show up every single Sunday. And we should make some decisions based on that assumption. So that assumption that our friends are showing up should change or impact how we do some things. Assuming that our friends are in the room, assuming that a new person is in the room, assuming that a guest is in the room should change the way that we present Scripture. It should change the way that we present on a Sunday morning from the stage. It should change maybe even some of the songs that we pick on a Sunday morning. It should change the language that we use to talk about the books of the Bible. It should impact how we communicate faith, how we communicate God, how we communicate about Scripture. If we're assuming that they are in the room, they being our friends, they being people who are far from God, they being people who are maybe afraid to show up, if we're assuming they're in the room, it should impact how we greet people who walk through our doors. It should impact how we say hello. It should impact how we react to a new face as they walk in the doors. It should impact how we say hello and how we shake hands. It should impact how we fashion our greeting team and all of that fun stuff. If we're assuming that they, our friends, are in the room, it should impact how we communicate and how we design the next steps for that guest. So when someone new walks into Branches, we should assume that they're in the room, and in light of that, we should address next steps in a way that fits them, that is clear to them. If we're assuming that a guest is showing up every single Sunday, it should force us to focus on our guest experience. Now, I want to sit there for just a few more minutes. And where I want to sit is on that guest experience and how much focus and how much energy and how much time we should spend evaluating and looking at our guest's experience. But before we do that, I want to make a little disclaimer, because I think it's so important. In the history of Branches, we've had a lot of pendulum swings in a lot of areas, and I think guest service or guest experience is one of those areas. In an effort to focus on our guest experience, in an effort to emphasize our guests, I don't want us to neglect the rest. So as we emphasize the guest, I don't want us to neglect the rest, because the rest is you, the rest is me, the rest is the people who make Branches tick. But I don't want to neglect the guest either in an effort to focus on the rest. So I want to keep that in balance. So keep that in mind as I talk through this. But I do think that if we're going to build a church that we can bring our friends to, that we can bring a guest to, we have to evaluate and look and focus on what our guests experience each and every Sunday. And there's some really specific, I think every department should be evaluating this, but there's some really specific departments that have a huge impact on our guest experience, specifically our guest first impression of Branches and honestly of God, of faith, and of the Bible. And some of those areas would be greeters, right? Guest comes in, they're walking in the door. Some of the first faces and interactions they have is with our greeting team. Another department, especially if we keep them where we tried to put them this Sunday and we're still evaluating that location, is the information kiosk. Man, we're communicating information to our guests through the information kiosk. Their experience greatly depends on that team and how that team is communicating. Some of the other areas would be the kids' check-in process. Not just the people there, but the process that they're going through, the process that we're walking through. You've seen some changes made there with the self-check-in kiosks right there in an effort to improve the guest experience. And so that team has a huge impact on our guest experience. The cafe, man, what we serve there and the interactions that they have with those of you who work in the cafe. Our VAC team, our vision announcements and celebration team, that portion of the day that starts the day off, where someone comes up and talks about the vision of the church, announces things, and celebrates things that are going on. Those are all massive, huge parts of the guest experience, and even our physical environments, right? From the front door all the way to the back door, from walking into the commons, into to the main sanctuary in this room, into our kids' environments. Our physical environments play a huge role in our guest experience, and we've seen some momentum being gained in those physical environments. And it's all in an effort to say, man, what is our guest experiencing? Assuming that every single Sunday, someone is bringing a friend and there's someone new in our building, we must assume every single week that someone new is in the room. And so in an effort to really try and create that culture and not forget that there's a guest showing up every single week, I want to challenge each and every one of you. You guys are team leaders. You're leading people in branches. You're making decisions that affect the whole, right? You're leading a part, but you're affecting the whole of the church. I want to challenge each and every one of you to schedule some time over the course of the next couple months, to schedule some time for you and your team, some of your team members, to get together in a room, have a meeting, and start to ask 4 questions that revolve around this idea of assuming that a guest is in the room, assuming that they're in the room. And I'm going to give you 4 questions, but it's up to you to schedule that time for your team to get together and ask these questions and explore, how are we doing at assuming that the guest is in the room? And so these 4 questions are written in the body of the email that this video was delivered in. So you don't have to write them down, but I want you to schedule this time and begin to ask these questions. And here's the first question. The first question is, are we ready for someone's friend to show up each week? So are we, our team, are we the cafe, are we the music team, are we the production team, the kids team, are we ready for someone's friend to show up each and every Sunday? Youth team, are we ready for someone's friend to show up every Wednesday? And begin to explore that and ask that question and listen to your team's feedback and your team's thoughts. Are we ready for someone's friend to show up? That's question number 1. Question number 2 that I want you to ask as a team is, if someone had never been here before, if someone had never shown up before, and what would they think of blank in our department as a first impression? And you fill in that blank with any element of your department. What would they think of this process as a first impression? What would they think of this scenario as a first impression? What would they think of this environment, this physical space, as a first impression? What would they think of this content as a first impression? And when I say first impression, again, I don't mean just branches, although I think that's important. But I think we have to believe and understand and recognize that if our friends, people who are far from God, people who are disconnected from faith, if our friends are walking in the doors, we may be providing a first impression of Jesus for them. We may be providing a first impression of church in general, church community, people who are known as Jesus followers. We may be presenting a first impression of Scripture, of the Bible, of faith in general for these people. And so ask that question in that context. Is this in our department? What would they think of this, of X, as a first impression for these things? So those first 2 questions really give us context. And the third question starts to put feet and starts to put action to what we've discovered with those first 2. So the third question is this: how can we, as a team, as a department, how can we improve our guest experience? When a guest comes through the doors, what can we do to improve? And this is where you start to find that, man, there's some little tweaks that we can make. Maybe there's some huge paradigm shift that we need to make in our department in order to improve our guest experience. But I think most of us will find that there's just some little tweaks, some language things, some physical environment things, maybe some interactions that can be changed, maybe some shuffling of personnel that maybe might be a better fit. And that's where we start to put feet to it. So that's the third question. How can we improve our guest experience? And then the fourth is this: are we inviting our guests to belong? As a team, as a department, when a guest shows up, are we inviting them to belong to a community? Are we inviting them to belong to a church? Are we inviting them to belong to something greater than just themselves? And as you ask those 4 questions, again, I think you'll find some serious momentum. I think you'll find some small tweaks that can make massive impact, that can radically transform the guest experience in your department. And if you really want to dig down and you really want to gain some real perspective, I would encourage you not just to invite some of your team members to this conversation in this meeting. I would encourage you to invite some team members from other departments and other teams who may be able to come into this meeting with some fresh eyes to see things that are right in front of your nose that you may miss. What I know is that when you work in something for so long, in one department, on one task for so long, it's easy to miss the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to miss the small, easy-to-fix obstacles because you're just too close. So if you want to really put some momentum into this conversation, invite someone from another team, one or two other people from another department to come and be involved in this conversation. But I want to encourage you to make this conversation happen. It's too important to neglect. It's too important not to do. Always make space at certain times and certain seasons to work on your department, not just in your department. My hope is that this content is helpful. Our hope as a leadership team is to support and to love you and to encourage you and to inspire you to make your department better, to grow your influence and your impact in our community and in our church. So hopefully this is helpful. I also want to encourage you, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have feedback, please just reply to this email. It'll go to the whole leadership team. It's leadership.team@branches.tv. You can always email that and get a hold of all of us. We would love to hear back from you. And if you take notes or have some significant learnings from these meetings, please share that with us. We can learn from you just as much as you can learn from us. This is a two-way street, and these videos are meant to engage in a conversation, not just disseminate data. So our hope is that this creates a conversation and that these videos and this content can be helpful and help you grow in your leadership as much as it's helping us grow in ours. So we love you guys, and we look forward to hearing back from you. Let's assume every Sunday that the guest is in the room. Thanks.